And welcome to Movies Suck. Today, we're going to have a look at The Mandalorian Episode 1. Well, Disney Plus is here, and the first episode of The Mandalorian has arrived and is getting rave reviews from many of my fellow YouTubers, and I have no idea why. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh. I can understand why a lot of them are enjoying it so far. It's because we've not had anything that truly resembles Star Wars for a pretty long time, and they're just starved for something with a little quality. After all, the last Star Wars movie was a travesty, and it's very hard to forget or even move on from it. In fact, I don't see any moving on from it, and I see no way in which they can fix Rian Johnson, or Ryan Johnson, however you say his name, and Jar Jar Abrams' colossal mistakes. But I digress. The Mandalorian is just very so-so. I watched it last night and I found it to be very wanting as far as any halfway decent programs go. If it wasn't for it being Star Wars, and I am a massive Star Wars fan, then I would have probably turned it over and watched something interesting like wet paint drying or an anime. For those that are interested, I am currently watching No Game, No Life. It's a bloody good thing that I didn't turn over though, since I would have missed that cool IG-88 scene, and that would have been unthinkable because that was easily the best bit of that program. I've longed to see how a live-action IG-88 would move, and luckily they did it just the way I'd imagined from the expanded universe. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's start at the beginning and work our way through. First, I'd like to say that I didn't hate it. I mean, it's competent enough, and I think it's just having first episode issues. After all, when I first tried to read the Harry Potter book, the first Harry Potter book, I found it so badly written that I just couldn't get past the first few pages. But once I forced myself, I found it to get better and better. So I'm hoping that the same will happen with The Mandalorian. If I can just force myself to endure the first few episodes, I'm sure I'll pick up, and you never know, this might finally be something that Disney Star Wars can be proud of. What is that voice in my head? Don't hold my breath. That's very good advice, thank you. Now, without getting into too many spoilers, because I'm not a big fan of spoilers, we start this story. Well, I say I'm not a big fan of spoilers. It does depend on what it is. Because some things, like Star Wars films these days, who cares? They start this story on a bar on an unknown planet where there are a couple of thugs that are harassing some blue fish-looking kind of guy. Then the Mandalorian walks in, and suddenly we have flashbacks to Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name. You kind of imagine him walking through some saloon doors with a cigarette and that like squinty look in his eye. You get the same thing with the Mandalorian. I mean, I guess they're aiming for that kind of Wild West lawless feel, especially since it's set after the fall of the Empire and the control has slipped. I mean, the New Republic probably didn't reach out that far. Anyway, one of the thugs gets all upset at spilling his drink, and he says to the Mandalorian, "Hey, Mando, you spilled my drink." Now, from this we can take it, this guy recognizes a Mandalorian, which means he must know something of their history, and should therefore know that a culture that is essentially the space Spartans is just not to be messed with. I mean, these are people that could take on Jedis. Unless he's simply a moron, he should have known better. But then, predictably, the Mandalorian shuts him up himself, even doing something pretty nasty to one of them with one of those, like, spirally doors that were very cool in the original Alien film. Then, the Mandalorian shows the fish guy a bounty puck that he has on him and says to come with him, alive or dead, to which the guy, who would obviously prefer to stay alive. Unfortunately, when the Mandalorian speaks, I just found his voice too friendly and with too much emotional inflection, which says to me that this guy is just not a terrifying example of cold calculation and unbargainable horror that was Boba Fett. But this is not Boba Fett, so we shouldn't expect anywhere near that level of sheer competence, which is why I forgive the fact that the Mandalorian is a bit like Fett's younger, less talented simpleton brother. It is the only way I can watch someone in Mandalorian-style armor not being Fett. But nevertheless, he's still a Mandalorian and therefore should be a force to be reckoned with. Another issue I had with the Mandalorian himself is that he moves very strangely. It's as if his legs are too short, or as I was told by a female friend who was watching this with me, he walks like a woman. I found this an interesting comment, as there's some little rumours about that the Mandalorian is like a bait and switch and he is actually a woman. But I kind of think that's unlikely. He just has a strange way of walking. Maybe it's the outfit. Maybe it restricts his movement and he walks a bit odd. I don't know. But he does walk strangely. If you happen to watch it, keep an eye out for that. There's also a moment where the Mandalorian is hailing a taxi, well, land speeder, and one arrives that was driven by an astromech, which I found slightly odd, as they're usually found on starships and fighters and stuff. So it just seems like an odd choice to be driving a land speeder. I mean, I'm sure it's just there for nostalgia, but I just find that out of place. And then, speaking of things that are out of place, the blue fish guy. He is so out of place. He just doesn't look Star Warsy. And he certainly doesn't sound like he should be in Star Wars. He feels like a Star Trek character, which again reminds me horribly of Jar Jar Abrams. Ugh. God, I wish I could forget that stuff. Those crappy Star Trek films. Anyway, getting off topic. Also, when the Mandalorian is dropping off his cargo of bounties to Apollo Creed from Rocky, Creed tries to pay him in Imperial credits, which the Mandalorian refuses. So instead he gets paid in, I seem to remember he called them calamari flans. But he only got paid half, because Creed only had half the flans, or half the money in flans. Calamari flans. Okay, anyway. I just found it strange that he didn't accept the other half of the money in the Imperial credits, because otherwise he would at least still had some money that he could use, even if it was only in places that are still Imperial controlled, since I'm sure the Imperial Navy hasn't completely disappeared. Not at that point, anyway. But I just found that weird. Who would accept half the money when the other person's got the other half of the money still, just not in the kind of money you'd prefer to have, because you might still have found a use for it. But anyway, I digress again, as I want to do. Then the Mandalorian becomes engaged in a very much under-the-table type job, and after a minor altercation with some Imperial stormtroopers, he goes off to find his mark. And I won't tell you much more, except that this gets very, very boring and not much happens in this episode. It just kind of drags along, feeling very dystopian and depressing. It doesn't have any of the fun that the original Star Wars had. It does pick up towards the end when we meet IG-88. I mean, hang on. IG-11. Bloody Disney. Hate bloody Star Wars Disney. Anyway. This is a very cool bit of the program, which I mentioned earlier, as we never got to see IG-88. We never saw what he could do. It was pretty amazing watching IG-11 and manoeuvring around, blasting everything that moved, and then being funny as hell with his self-destruct thing. You have to watch out for that. That was very funny. It's worth watching the episode just to see that. But IG-88 was a real legend, so would have been far better to see. But you have to remember, we're currently watching the bounty hunter equivalent of the B or even the C team. So I'm trying to keep my expectations low. This is not Boba Fett. This is not Bosk. This is not IG-88. This is not like the pinnacle of bounty hunters. This is like somewhere a few tiers down. Anyway, I won't spoil the end and tell you who or what the mystery bounty was. There are plenty of other reviews out there that will tell you all about it. Just go watch Doomcock or Nerdrotic. Also, as a side note, I have rewatched the episode, and it does play better on a second viewing, so I'm pretty hopeful for this series. It may be dull as ditch water right now, but it does have some promise. So, my advice is, if you happen to end up watching this, then at worst, you'll have spent 45 bored minutes, and at best, you'll actually find something Star Wars that doesn't make you throw up in your mouth. Anyway, this is Movie Sucks signing out. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the flip side.